The first time Jake Mercer saw her, she was standing in the rain like something forgotten. It was late October, cold enough that the rain felt like needles against his skin. He had ridden into Cedar Ridge for supplies, nothing more. But as he tied his horse outside the general store, he saw her across the street, a woman in a black dress too thin for the weather, her dark hair plastered to her face, a worn carpetbag at her feet. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at the closed door of the boarding house like it might open if she willed it hard enough. Jake finished his business and rode home. But her face stayed with him. That was 3 days before she appeared at his ranch. The knock came after midnight. Sharp, desperate. Jake grabbed his rifle and opened the door. She stood on his porch, soaked through, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Her eyes were hollow, rimmed red from crying or exhaustion or both. "Please," she whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." 6 months later, she was still there. Not as a guest, not as hired help, as his wife. But it didn't start that way. It started with pity. 3 days before that midnight knock, Jake had been in Cedar Ridge when the stagecoach rolled in. He watched from the feed store as passengers stepped down into the mud. Most were men. One was the woman in black. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who had been traveling too long. The driver tossed down her carpetbag. It landed hard. She flinched, but said nothing. "You're Mrs. Hale?" The boarding house owner, Mrs. Fletcher, called from across the street. The woman nodded. "Letter came yesterday," Mrs. Fletcher said flatly. "Your husband's brother wired. Said he ain't paying for your room after all. Said you got no claim to family money." The woman went pale. "But he wrote to me. He said, don't matter what he said. No payment, no room." Mrs. Fletcher turned and went inside. The woman stood alone in the ring. Jake should have walked away. He had his own troubles. His ranch was small, his profits thin. Winter was coming. He didn't need complications. But something about the way she stood there, dignified even in her despair, made him stop. "Ma'am," he said quietly. She turned. Up close, he saw she was younger than he'd thought. Maybe 30. Her face was drawn, but her eyes held a sharp intelligence. "There's a church 2 streets over," he said. "Reverend Cole might help." "Thank you," she said softly. He tipped his hat and left. But he thought about her all the way home. 2 days later, he rode back into town. He told himself it was for nails. It wasn't. He found her sitting on a bench outside the church, her carpetbag beside her. Her dress was still damp. Her hands were folded in her lap, but he saw the tremor in them. "Reverend turn you away?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "No." He offered the church basement. "But..." She hesitated. "There are men who sleep there." He said it wasn't safe for a woman alone. Jake's jaw tightened. "Where's your family?" "Dead," she said simply. "My husband died 6 months ago. Fever. His family wanted nothing to do with me. I thought his brother might help. I was wrong." She said it without self-pity. Just fact. "You got money?" $3. Not enough for stage fare. Not enough for anything. Jake should have walked away. Instead, he heard himself say, "There's a widow in town. Mrs. Calloway. She might take you in." I asked. She said she's full. Of course she did. No one in Cedar Ridge wanted the burden of a penniless widow. Jake stood there, rain beginning to fall again, and made a decision he'd regret and not regret for the rest of his life. "My ranch is 10 miles north," he said. "You can stay 1 night. Get dry. Get fed. Tomorrow I'll take you to the next town. Bigger place. More opportunities." She stared at him. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am." "Why would you help me?" He thought about that. "Because nobody else will." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she stood. "1 night," she said. "1 night," he agreed. But as they rode through the rain toward his ranch, Jake Mercer had no idea that 1 night would stretch into 6 months. That the broken woman behind him would become the strongest person he'd ever known. That pity would turn into something he'd stopped believing in years ago. That he'd fall in love with a stranger. And that when trouble came for her, and it would come, he'd be ready to fight for her like she was already his. Her name was Catherine. She told him that first night as she sat by his fire, wrapped in a blanket, her wet dress drying on a chair. Her hands curled around a tin cup of coffee like it was the only warm thing left in the world. "Catherine Hale," she said. "I was Catherine Brennan before." Jake nodded from across the room, giving her space. "Jake Mercer. I know. The man at the feed store mentioned you. Nothing good, I hope." The smallest smile touched her lips. "He said you keep to yourself." "That's accurate. They fell into silence. Rain drummed against the roof. The fire crackled. Catherine's eyes drifted around the cabin. Simple, clean, built by a man who lived alone and didn't mind it. "You've been kind," she said quietly. "I won't impose longer than necessary. Told you. One night. Tomorrow I'll take you to Ridgemont. Bigger town. You might find work." She nodded, but something in her face said she'd heard that promise before. That night, Jake gave her his bed and slept on the floor by the fire. He lay awake listening to her restless breathing, the small sounds of someone who'd forgotten how to feel safe. Morning came cold and clear. He woke to the smell of coffee. Catherine stood at his stove, her hair neatly pinned, her dress still wrinkled but clean. She found his skillet and made eggs from his hens. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "You gave me shelter. It's the least I can offer." They ate in comfortable quiet. Then Jake saddled his horse. "Ridgemont's 4 hours," he said. "We should leave soon." Catherine nodded. She gathered her carpet back, but as she stepped onto the porch, she stopped. "Mr. Mercer," she said carefully, "what kind of work do you imagine I'll find?" He hesitated. The truth was, a woman alone with no references wouldn't find much. Laundry, maybe. Cleaning. If she was lucky. "Something," he said. "Something," she repeated. She looked out at the mountains. "And when that something doesn't come?" He didn't answer. She turned to face him. "I'm not a foolish woman. I know what happens to women with no money and no prospects. I'd rather not become one of them." The words hit harder than any blow. "What are you asking?" he said. "Let me stay," she said. "Not as a guest. As help. I can cook, clean, mend, garden. I'm stronger than I look. I won't take charity. I'll earn my keep." Jake studied her. She was thin, worn down by grief and exhaustion. But her eyes were steady. "I don't need help," he said. "Yes, you do." She gestured at the cabin. "Your chimney's smoking wrong. Your bread's hard as stone. Your mending's coming undone. You're managing, but barely." She was right. He'd been managing, nothing more. "1 week," he said finally. "Trial. If it doesn't work, I take you to Ridgemont." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you." That week became 2. Then a month. Catherine worked harder than any hired hand Jake had ever known. She fixed the chimney. She planted a winter garden. She mended every torn shirt and sock. She cooked meals that actually tasted like something worth eating. But more than that, the cabin changed. It stopped feeling like a place he survived in and started feeling like a home. They fell into rhythms. Mornings, she had coffee ready when he came in from feeding the horses. Evenings, they ate together and talked about weather, cattle, books she'd read, places he'd been. She never spoke about her husband. He never asked. By the end of the 2nd month, Jake realized he looked forward to coming home. Not just to rest, but to see her. That scared him more than any storm. One evening in December, as snow began to fall, Catherine sat mending by the fire. Jake watched her hands move. Quick, efficient, graceful. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "Have I done something wrong?" "No. Opposite. You've done everything right. I just wondered if you missed city life. People. Noise." She set down her mending. "I spent 5 years in a city, Mr. Mercer. I was lonelier there than I've ever been here." The honesty in her voice struck him. "Jake," he said. "What?" "Call me Jake. You've been here 2 months." Mr. Mercer sounds strange now. She smiled. "Jake." Something shifted between them that night. The next morning, riders appeared on the horizon. Jake saw them from the barn. 3 men, moving fast. He grabbed his rifle. Catherine stepped onto the porch. "Who are they?" "Don't know." "Get inside." The riders stopped in the yard. The leader was tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes. "I'm looking for Catherine Hale." Jake's blood went cold. "Who's asking?" "Her brother-in-law, Richard Hale." The man's gaze moved past Jake to Catherine on the porch. "There you are. We've been searching for weeks." Catherine's face drained of color. "What do you want?" Jake asked. Richard smiled. "My brother left debts. Considerable ones. His widow is responsible." "That's not how the law works," Jake said. "It is when you sign documents," Richard replied. He pulled papers from his coat. "Catherine signed as guarantor before my brother died. She owes $1,500. "That's a lie," Catherine whispered. "It's in writing." Richard's smile widened. "You'll come with us. Work off the debt." Jake stepped between them. "She's not going anywhere." Richard's men reached for their guns. And in that moment, Jake Mercer understood something with perfect clarity. He wasn't letting her go. Not now. Not ever. She's staying here, Jake said, his voice calm but his grip tight on the rifle. Richard Hale laughed. You a lawyer, Cowboy? No. But I know Sheriff Brennan and Cedar Ridge. We can ride there now. Let him look at those papers. Richard's smile faltered. The debt is legitimate. Then you won't mind the sheriff confirming that. The men shifted in their saddles. Richard's jaw tightened. This doesn't concern you. It does now, Jake said. Catherine works for me. She's under my protection. Works for you. Richard's eyes narrowed. Or something else? Jake's finger moved to the trigger. Careful. The air grew tense. Catherine stood frozen on the porch. Finally, Richard gathered his reins. This isn't over, he said. I'll return with a marshal. They rode off. Jake didn't lower his rifle until they disappeared over the ridge. Catherine sank onto the porch step. He'll come back. Let him. Jake sat beside her. Were those papers real? I don't know. Thomas asked me to sign things before he died. I thought it was about the house. Her voice broke. I didn't read carefully. I was so tired. He was dying, and I just sighed. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out. She looked at him, tears streaming. Why are you doing this? Because I love you, he almost said. But it was too soon. Too much. Because it's right, he said instead. The next morning, they rode to Cedar Ridge together. Sheriff Brennan was a fair man, gruff, but honest. He examined the papers Richard had shown them. These are forgeries, he said finally. Signatures don't match the county records. Richard Hale's been running this scheme across 3 territories. Preys on widows, shows fake documents, forces them into labor contracts. Catherine gasped. So I own nothing? Nothing. And Richard Hale is wanted for fraud. Brennan looked at Jake. He'll come back for her. Men like that don't quit. Let him come, Jake said. They returned to the ranch. Catherine was quiet the whole ride. When they arrived, she finally spoke. You called me yours, she said. When you told Richard the first was under your protection. Jake dismounted. Didn't mean to overstep. He didn't. She looked at him directly. But I need to know what that meant. He tied the horses, buying time. Then he turned to face her. 3 months ago, I let you stay out of pity, he said. Thought I was doing a kind thing. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being pity. Stopped being charity. What did it become? She asked softly. Something I wasn't looking for. Something I didn't think I deserved. He met her eyes. I don't want you to leave, Catherine. Not for work. Not because you're safe now. I want you to stay because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. She stepped closer. I buried a husband I didn't love. We married young. It was practical, not passionate. I thought that was enough. Then he died, and I felt relief more than grief. I hated myself for that. Catherine, let me finish. She touched his chest, right over his heart. These months here, I felt more alive than I did in 5 years of marriage. Not because of the work. Because of you. Because you see me. Not as a burden. Not as property. As a person. You are a person, he said. A remarkable one. She smiled through fresh tears. I don't want to leave either, Jake. But I won't stay as your employee. His heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying if I stay as your equal. Your partner. She took a breath. Your wife? If you'll have me. For a moment, Jake couldn't speak. Then he cupped her face in his rough hands. I'd be honored, he whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and sure. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, 6 months of loneliness and fear dissolving into something warm and real. They married a week later in Cedar Ridge's small church. Sheriff Brennan stood witness. Mrs. Fletcher, who'd turned Catherine away, didn't attend. But half the town did, curious about the widow and the hermit rancher. Richard Hale came back 1 month later, this time with a marshal. But the marshal arrested Richard instead, based on Brennan's evidence and testimony from 6 other women Richard had defrauded. Catherine watched from the porch as they led him away. It's over, Jake said, his arm around her waist. Yes, she agreed. It is. Spring came. The ranch flourished. Catherine's garden bloomed. She started teaching reading to ranch hands' children on Sunday afternoons. Jake built an extra room onto the cabin. For what? She asked. Future, he said simply. One evening, 6 months after their wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Catherine rested her head on Jake's shoulder. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Letting me stay that first night. He kissed her hair. Every day I wake up grateful I did. I thought I'd lost everything, she said quietly. My husband. My home. My future. I stood in that rain thinking I'd rather disappear than keep fighting. And now, she lifted her head and smiled. Now I understand the difference between surviving and living, between a house and a home, between obligation and love. Jake pulled her close. I spent 10 years alone thinking I preferred it. Then you knocked on my door at midnight, and everything changed. I knocked on your door desperate, and I opened it out of pity, he said. Funny how the worst moments lead to the best things. Catherine looked at the land spreading before them. Their land now, legally hers as much as his. I came here with nothing. You brought everything, Jake corrected. I just didn't know I needed it until you arrived. Inside the cabin, the fire burned warm. The table was set for two. The bed they now shared waited under quilts Catherine had sewn. What started as one night of charity had become a lifetime of partnership. The widow who had nowhere to go had found a home, and the cowboy who'd lived alone had found something he'd stopped believing in, a reason to stop being alone.